Today, we need to talk about a story that absolutely rocked Hollywood, and really the entire country. The tragic killing of director Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle. It's a story that's just incredibly difficult, sitting right at the intersection of fame, family, and a long public struggle with mental illness that ended in the most unthinkable way. Okay, let's get into it.
And this right here, this is the quote that just hangs over this entire tragedy. According to a podcast that covered the case, these were supposedly Rob Reiner's words, spoken at a party just hours before he was killed. It's just a horrifying statement of fear that, unbelievably, became a prophecy.
So here are the core facts, and they're brutal. On that Sunday afternoon, police were called to the Reiner's home in the Brentwood area of LA, and what they found inside was just horrific.
And the victims? We're talking about two pillars of the creative and activist communities. Rob Reiner, 78 years old, the mind behind timeless classics like When Harry Met Sally and The Princess Bride, and his wife of more than 35 years, Michelle Singer Reiner, who was a really celebrated photographer and advocate in her own right. Just a profound loss any way you look at it.
The official report from the medical examiner confirmed what everyone feared. The cause of death was multiple sharp force injuries. It's a clinical term, sure, but what it really means is that the attack was incredibly violent, a stabbing.
So how could something like this even happen? Well, to get any kind of understanding, you really have to look at the long and very difficult history of the man accused of this crime, their son, Nick Reiner.
This timeline here, it really lays out a life that was defined by a struggle, and a very public one at that. Nick's battle with addiction started when he was just a teenager. By 2016, he'd been in rehab 18 separate times. He even co-wrote a film with his dad about it called Being Charlie. And more recently, his mental health issues became so severe that he was put under a year-long conservatorship. That's a legal thing where a court has to step in and appoint a guardian to manage a person's life and finances. This was never some hidden secret. It was a long, painful journey for the whole family, and it was all out in the open.
I'm hearing him say this, in his own words from an interview back in 2016. It just paints such a vivid, terrifying picture of how precarious his life was when he was homeless and deep in his addiction. It's a really stark reminder of the stakes he was dealing with for years and years.
Okay, so let's zoom in now. Let's shift from the long history to the immediate events leading up to the crime and focus on the timeline of those final hours.
This sequence of events is just crucial to understanding the case. It all starts at a party where multiple sources said they saw a really heated, loud argument between Nick and his father. The very next afternoon, his sister Romy makes the horrifying discovery. A 911 call is placed, and by that evening, the LAPD had found and arrested Nick.
But his arrest was really just the beginning of the legal story. The entire investigation now centers on a critical question about Nick Reiner's state of mind at the time.
This right here, this is the question that everything is going to turn on. It's not just about if he did it, but whether he was legally sane when it happened. In California, the law on this is pretty specific. Basically, what the defense has to prove is that because of a mental illness, he either didn't understand what he was doing or he didn't know it was morally and legally wrong. That's a very high bar to clear.
Now you can bet the prosecution is going to point to actions like these as evidence of what the law calls consciousness of guilt. Things like leaving the scene, trying to clean up at a hotel, and the fact that the murder weapon is still missing. All of these actions suggest he was trying to cover his tracks, which implies he knew that what he'd done was wrong.
So you can see, this is setting up the two totally different stories we're going to hear in court. On one side, the prosecution is focusing on that evidence of a cover-up. They're looking into possible motives, like maybe a fight over another conservatorship or getting cut off financially. And on the other side, the defense will be highlighting Nick's long documented history of severe mental illness and his reported belief that this whole thing, his arrest, is some kind of conspiracy against him.
There's actually a specific word for this type of crime: parricide. And while the definition is simple, killing a parent, the act itself is seen as one of society's ultimate taboos. It's why these cases are just so profoundly shocking to us.
So just how rare is something like this? I mean, really rare. Research from the criminologist James Allen Fox shows that the specific circumstances here are just incredibly unusual. A double homicide parricide is already rare, but one done with a knife in a huge city like LA? It's shocking how statistically unlikely it is. To put it in perspective, only about 8% of all parricides involve killing more than one parent. It's just staggering.
All right, so where does that leave the case right now? Let's take a look at the legal battle that's shaping up.
So, Nick Reiner, who's 32, is facing 2 counts of first-degree murder. But this is really important. Prosecutors have added what's called a special circumstance allegation of multiple murders. That elevates the entire case and basically opens the door to the most severe penalties California has: life in prison without parole or even the death penalty.
And it's interesting, he started with a pretty high-profile lawyer, but now he's being represented by a public defender. On February 23rd, he officially entered his plea, not guilty. So you can see the legal process is slowly moving forward. The charges were filed back in December, then there was that change in his legal team in January, and then the not guilty plea in February. The next big step is a preliminary hearing that's scheduled for late April.
You know, there's this really profound, heartbreaking irony to all of this. Rob Reiner spent 40 years of his life as a master storyteller. He understood plot, he understood character, and he understood how stories build and build toward an inevitable ending. And yet somehow, he found himself trapped in a real-life story where he could see the tragic ending coming, but was completely powerless to rewrite it.
And this quote from the Hidden Killers podcast, this one really gets to the heart of it. It just perfectly captures that impossible situation that so many families find themselves in when they're in crisis. Just because you see the danger coming doesn't mean you can stop it, especially when your love for the person at the center of it all keeps you right there on the tracks.
And that's what we're left with, isn't it? This final, haunting question. It's really the core of this tragedy and so many others just like it. And it's a question without any easy answers, just a devastating reflection on love, mental illness, and violence.